Today I'm going to be talking about motivating and engaging users with government data, which if you read the abstract to the talk, we've been thinking about, the background of the group is thinking about visualization and data visualization and how to engage people around data, but we've been particularly inspired by the push for open government and transparency of government data. So that was where we started with this project. To give you a little bit of background, so I'm part of the Visual Communication Lab, which is here as part of the IBM Center for Social Software. The Center for Social Software does different research in social software collaboration, enterprise communication, social visualization. If you've been around the Boston area for a while, the origins of this group was Lotus Research, and we're in the old Lotus building right now, is how people often refer to it around Kendall Square. To give you some more context of what the group does specifically, here's everyone in the group. It's myself, Yannick Asagba, Steve Levy, Matt McKeon, Adam Perrer, who just joined us 2 weeks ago, and Irene Ross. And what our group is interested in right now is social visualization and also text visualization, which is what many bills, the project I'll be talking about, looks at. And then thinking about storytelling with data and also just general engaging people with data. So I'm going to jump straight into telling you about many bills and giving you an overview of the project. And then at the end, I'm going to try to take a step back and think about what does this project mean in terms of the government transparency movement. So the project is called Many Bills, and it was built by Yannick Asagba and Irene Ross, who's here in the audience, and Matt McKeon. So if you have lots of technical questions, I'm just going to direct them to Irene Ross. So the Many Bills started with the motivating question of how do we get citizens to read, navigate, and understand legislation. So I want to take a poll. How many people have read a bill? Oh, okay, this is the highest response rate I've ever gotten from a crowd. So usually it's like 1% of the audience, but this was maybe 20%. So this is a great group. Okay, so that was the challenge we were starting with, is how do we get people to read it, but also to understand it. So I guess the people here are already sort of familiar with how challenging reading a bill can be. Bills are long. The language is not common language that we're used to. It's often referring to the U.S. legislation itself refers to the U.S. code, so sometimes it reads almost like a diff, where it's saying strike that line and replace it with this other line. So as itself, it's difficult to understand. Okay, so what we did was we built the site called Many Bills. We launched it publicly in April 2010, just less than a year ago. What it's doing is text analysis of the U.S. congressional legislation and then using visualization techniques to make the text more approachable. And then we're also trying to layer on top of that a people-centric view onto the legislation by showing you what your Congress people are up to in terms of legislation, hoping that having that social bent will make it easier to approach. Okay, so here's the screenshot of the homepage. I'm going to give a quick demo in a second. The URL is manybills.us. So let me run through what exactly it's doing. So here are 3 bills. To give you a quick summary, a bill is comprised of sections. Bills are very long. We're showing it here in a condensed format where it's just a snippet of each section. These are 3 bills lined up together. So what Many Bills does is it takes the bill and the general topic, this one on the far right is science, is the label we get from it. From the text in the bills and from these labels, we then use automatic text analysis, machine learning approach to figure out the topics of each section. So we're adding, the color's terrible on this monitor, which is unfortunate, but basically we're layering color on top of, oh, the color's much better over there. Look at that slide. So we layer color on top of the different sections in the bill so that you can just visually get an overview of what the different sections are about. And we're also augmenting each section with a little subject badge, which I highlighted there. And then we're also offering different zoom levels so that you can see the bills at different scales, basically, because these documents are so long. So at the we call it minified mode, at the smallest scale, you can get an idea of the different topics that are covered across an entire bill. And then we allow users to create collections and save collections of bills. And so this is a way that I can give my commentary on a collection of bills and share that with other users. And then, as I mentioned before, we use Congress people as an entry point to the data. So it's hard to know where to begin with bills, but if I'm interested in John Kerry, this can be a starting point for me to explore some legislation. So I'm going to give you a very specific example of sort of the use case that we think many bills is good for. So in January of 2009, Congress passed the Credit Card Act, and this was the longer title was Protecting Americans from Predatory Lending Practices by Credit Card Companies. So this was an important bill to protect consumers. There were 6 revisions of the bill. So the way a short tutorial on how a bill works is it's introduced by the House or it's introduced by the Senate. It goes into committee, they discuss it, then they put it on the calendar for a vote. And it has to be voted on in both the House and the Senate. When both have voted and approved it, the president signs it and it becomes a law. So basically, so as a bill moves through each of these stages, there are different versions of it. So here on the screen, we have the 6 different versions of the credit card bill, and we've color-coded them based on the topics, and you can see green is the finance color. So logically, this finance bill is mostly green because it's about the financial industry. As you can see, as it goes through the 6 versions, it gets longer and longer each time, and this is a pretty consistent trend with our U.S. government. The bills get longer over time. So what you notice is down at the bottom, there's differing colors popping in. And this is also something that may be just a matter of doing business in government, is that as a bill gets longer, the sections are not always on the original topic of the bill. So in this bill, one of the later sections is on the topic of public lands, is what our machine learning algorithm detected, which is very different than finance. And so the section that's highlighted down on the bottom was titled Protecting Americans from Violent Crime. Okay, so with the single click in many bills, you can expand that section to read. And that's sort of an important point with many bills is we didn't want to remove users from the original text. Like a lot of text analysis tools abstract you away from the original document. And so here we're trying to use these different levels of zoom, but never taking you away from the original source so that you can see what the legislation is actually about. So with a single click, you can expand that section about protecting Americans from violent crime and read what it's about. And basically what the section is specifying is that anyone in the US is allowed to bring firearms into national parks. You may remember this from the news media, but this was one of those compromises that happens near the end of the bill process, where in order to get Republicans to sign the bill, they had this section that they wanted to be put in, and then they would vote for it. So anyway, so this is one of our our ideal examples of how many bills can help you drill down to that exact section. Otherwise, for a layperson, it's very hard to understand the subtleties of this, but through this summarization, you can cut to the interesting bits. Okay, so I'm going to jump over, let's see, to a short demo. Basically, I don't have a huge demo planned. I just wanted to give you a demonstration of how the site actually works. So if you come to our homepage, please take our survey. We're looking for people to answer our survey. But in addition to that, what you can do is you can browse collections, you can see members of Congress, you can search. So if I do a search up here, I happen to know that the healthcare bill was 48, oh, I've forgotten already what I just had there, 4872. I think was the number I just typed in. Yeah, the healthcare bill, which is sort of well known in the last year that has been put through Congress. If you search for a bill, what immediately comes up are it found 5 bills, and each of these bills have the same number. You can see the healthcare bill number up at the very top. These are the bill as it progressed through the stages of approvals. And you can see it's in this sort of middle, it's in this truncated mode where you can see a little bit of each section, and I can keep scrolling and scrolling, and then you'll see, there was a lot of discussion about how long the healthcare bill was. So I'll just keep scrolling here for a minute, and you can get a good sense of how long it actually was. And then if I jump over here when it becomes too long, we can switch into this compressed mode where I can get a better idea. So the way you can browse many bills is you can scroll down, and this bill is about health, but then you'll notice there are lots of sections about other things. So here's a purple section. If we scroll down, we can see the key Purple is about government politics. It often relates to government operations, government agencies. So if we, let me see, scroll down to one of these purple ones. There was discussion in the news about death panels that in the healthcare bill, and there was a lot of discussion of if you actually went to go read the bill, you would see that it didn't say death panel. So that was what some people were saying. Other people were arguing you would find details about the death panels. Well, because of the length of this bill, it's not practical for a layperson to read it. But because we can drill down on these, particularly these purple sections, because it has to do with government agencies, and that was presumably what the death panels were. These were going to be government agencies that would decide if you live or die. You can now scroll up and down this bill and sort of drill down into these sections. So this is a Health Choices Administration section. If we drill down further, and so on, I'm not going to go too deep into the detail. But the idea is that now we have a way to make the bill much more approachable. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over to Congresspeople. So let's say you're not interested in a particular bill, but you're more interested in what, say, John Kerry's been up to. You can go over to his page, and you can see that here's a summary of basically all the bills that John Kerry has sponsored and co-sponsored. Co-sponsored is a particular category of bill where many Congresspeople join together to sponsor a bill. So you can see that John Kerry's been quite active. He's many bills. Some of them have passed. Quickly, what you'll notice is that not a lot of bills actually make it all the way through the process. Most of them are introduced. Not many of them are passed. So the ones with the hash marks are ones that actually have passed. Yeah, so you'll see there's one up there that he sponsored. There are 3 down here that he co-sponsored that have passed. You can see from the top here that Kerry's really focused on the finance sector as his first topic, and then foreign, immigration and foreign trade are his next topic. So let me skip to Scott Brown, who's a new congressperson, or new senator, so he has a lot less history. None of the bills he's sponsored have passed, not many of them. If they have the gray outline, that means they've gotten onto the calendar. So he sponsored 2, but neither one of them have even gotten on the calendar. The top things he's most interested in are finance and environment. Let me show you, Barney Frank is a very active and senior representative. So he seems actually particularly effective. He has a lot of bills that have passed. A bunch of ones about, let's see, what is pink? Sorry. This is about emergency management and armed forces is one of the topics he's interested in. So anyway, I encourage you to go look and browse around and check out what your congresspeople are doing, particularly with the elections. We think this might be a nice way to actually see what your people have been up to, because we're showing not just what passed and became law, but we're showing their activities around law and what they're trying to get passed. Okay, let me get back to the slides. So I said we launched in April. So we've had like 11,000 unique visitors. Many visitors come to the site and don't do much. So 6,000 actually go and do something on the site. About 13% of the visitors come back more than once. So we see these as optimistic. The major takeaway, though, is that there's a huge power law when it comes to the topic of legislation. 2% of our users account for 50% of the activity on the site. So we have we have people who are really enthusiastic about legislation, really want to use this as a research tool and go really deep on it. I think this speaks to the larger issue that one of our takeaways from this project is that legislation is still a complex topic, and we found that when we think about where our next project may go in this space, we're not sure if legislation was too hard to engage citizens. It's not maybe the appropriate level. But anyway, that's sort of our current thought about it. But on the positive side, people who are interested in legislation have found the site to be quite useful. So they're using it for basically 3 things. I've shown you some of these. Basically making reading a bill more manageable, assisting in discovering these outlier sections, and also providing a summary of what congresspeople's participation is in the legislative process. I'm going to give you some quotes from users. So making it more readable, this is a woman who works at a nonprofit. Part of her job is to read legislation. So she said most people try to look at legislation in terms of summarizing it or reading the news articles, but what she really appreciated is that she could get to the actual text. Then another user, Wayne, who's a journalist, he really liked to find the outliers. Like when you shrink it down and look at it to see what the biggest outliers are, that's a great tool to get a 2-second glance at something that would take 3 days to read. And then I think from our interviews, I think he might be our most enthusiastic user. We're really excited about him. This guy's just a politically active citizen. So he's in the Massachusetts area and has a city organized political group that gets together to just talk about politics. So he used the site to do many things, but one of them was he looked up his congressperson, and then he looked up what Harry Reid was doing as a comparison point, and then he looked up what House Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was doing, and you can see that Mitch McConnell's not proposing legislation, and so he had a strong reaction to this, where he concluded that the House Minority Leader's job is not to propose legislation, but actually to prevent legislation from being passed. So he took away that message, and actually went and looked at a bunch of Republicans and realized that I think the minority party's job is not to propose legislation because the number of bills they've proposed is many fewer than Republicans. But anyway, that's the sort of sense-making that he's doing with the site. So the summary of many bills is that visualization, we're thinking of it as a mechanism for engaging people with complex government data. And what we hypothesize is that the people-centric browsing enhances the engagement as an entry point. But like I alluded to a minute ago, US legislation is still a complex, it may be too big of a challenge for getting all citizens engaged. So I want to take a step back, and I realize this is going to be a short talk, but I have a couple more slides where I wanted to talk about the Gov2.0 movement. So last week was the O'Reilly second annual Gov2.0 Summit. So Tim O'Reilly is really pushing that government release their data, and he's holding these annual summits where he's trying to bring together government people and technology people to talk about what can be done around open government. And so last week was the second meeting, 1 year later, and there was supposed to be a meeting of reporting of successes, but there weren't actually that many successes, which was an interesting lesson to be learned. So basically the movement started when Obama in 2009 issued a memorandum on open government calling for greater transparency, participation, and collaboration. So these are lofty goals, and government agencies are really only responding to the first one of transparency, where they're opening up their data. So I encourage you to go to any of these sites. Data.gov is the federal government site where they release data, and so you can get access data sets from there and start building applications or building visualizations from there. The Sunlight Foundation is, I think, the leader in this movement of trying to gather people together to do productive things. And then there are a bunch of other websites run by nonprofits. So the state of the art is that apps are being built where citizens are allowed to input their data, but typically these are around crowdsourcing at the local level. So maybe you've heard of the site SeeClickFix. This is where you can report something on the street, like a pothole, or something that needs to be fixed. And you report it on this website, it gets sent to the government, and the government can act on it. So there are many wonderful applications at this level where citizens are enabled and empowered to communicate, but it doesn't have anything to do with the open data and the open government movement. On the other hand, lots of government data is being released and data visualizations are being built, but the screenshots I put up there, a surprising number of them are maps. I mean, it's just points on a map, and those are good as a first pass, but they aren't really about helping you understand the data or thinking about what you can do with that data and moving to the next level. So we really think that these are still disconnected from collaboration, communication, and social interaction, which was all part of what the Obama's Open Government Memorandum was about. As an illustration of this, the Sunlight Foundation is doing a wonderful job, and they have these contests called Apps for America, but one of their criteria for the apps the criteria that they judge on have nothing to do with the interaction or engagement of the citizen. It has more to do with design and presentation of information. So the legacy of the group that I'm in and my group is in is that the group built Many Eyes, which is a website which I think was presented by Fernanda Villegas last year to BostonCHI. So Many Eyes is all about democratizing data. People bring their own data and they visualize the data. And through that experience, we know that people can engage with data and are craving building visualizations. So, I mean, I encourage you to check out the site, but there are thousands of visualizations created by people. So we know that the enthusiasm's there, Furthermore, we know that people are, they're using many eyes to specifically engage around government data. So people are getting the data on their own and they're uploading it to many eyes. So we know that the energy is there. What we're seeing is that there's a disconnect between in the Government 2.0 space, a disconnect between user engagement and open government. So I'm stealing this slide from Kathy Sierra from the Creating Passionate Users blog. She had this slide last week at the summit. She said there's this assumption going on that if you open up the data, there's some magical step that happens, and then you have the passionate citizen. And so we need to figure out what's happening in this magical step. Our group's like step into this direction. This is how we're thinking about the space. First, we think you need to create a tool that helps people understand the data and the analysis that you're doing on this government data. Then next, enable the citizen and users to communicate their discoveries that they made in the government data. Then allow people to actually do their own interpretation of the data and do their own analysis, basically. And then we see the final, a great stage to get to would be to have people contribute to the data set themselves, like doing correction of the data or augmenting the data with their own information. We see many bills as sort of towards the beginning of this, but this is how we are envisioning the space. So we see many bills as a first step where we're really trying to focus on helping people understand and maybe share what they find. But there's a long path to go. So this is my final slide. Basically, I wanted to present this as an opportunity to the CHI Boston community that, from the government's perspective, opening up all this government data is a big change for them. And there was a lot of discussion about that last week. Alex Howard from O'Reilly Media summarized the government's perspective about this movement as saying, like, it's risky, it's incremental, and it's largely an unfunded mandate. So the government itself is struggling with releasing their data, so we should commend the progress that they've made in releasing it. But then there's the whole other side of the picture. The government's role is not to build these engaging apps. In fact, Tim O'Reilly's arguing against that. They're saying that citizens and developers, our community should be building these applications because it's more of a competitive. There are many reasons. It's a competitive marketplace. We're more in touch with what citizens need. We're not stuck within the government bureaucracy. There are many reasons why our community is more skilled at doing this. But from what we've seen, there isn't actually that much in this space. So I would encourage everybody to think about whether or not you're interested in doing this, because for the government to be held accountable to their actions, they are releasing the data, but we need to have citizens actually engage with the data in order to make the government accountable to it. So anyway, the way to join the movement would be data.gov is where the government is posting data. There's some debate about how high quality the data is, but there is data there. Challenge.gov is a website the government announced recently where the government agencies actually post challenges that they have that they hope citizens can help them with. Not all of them are data challenges. Some of them are like build a new jet. Some of them are beyond our means, but other challenges are in the space of web tools that the government needs. Another great place is Apps for America. The Sunlight Foundation sponsors these contests. There's also a program called Code for America, which is following the model of Teach for America, but it's bringing together coders for 1 year to build different applications for cities around the US. And so the last message is, I'd love to get feedback and questions about whether or not you think this is the right path to think about citizen engagement around data, but we're thinking about this understanding, communicating, interpreting, and then giving back to the data. And that's all. So, questions? Yeah. Oh, here, I think you raised your hand first.
So, go back. Can we have you come to the mic, please? Thank you. Very nice presentation. Yes, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. My name is Alex Chisholm. I'm from the Learning Games Network. And if you could just back up to your pathway there. The thing that struck me about the 3 examples you offered were that in each of the users, in each instance, there was relevance. One had to do it for her job, one was a writer, and the other one because he had a local group. What's missing in that step 2 to get to passionate citizen, and in this model, is where you build in the relevance of why someone would need this. And so in terms of, I don't know whether you're assuming that it falls in understanding or communication, that part of the communication is explaining the relevance. But one of the things for users or for citizens just generally is to understand the connection between the legislation and the impact that it'll have in their lives. And it strikes me that one of the things that people harp on about a lot is the taxes. So if you can tie the legislation to fiscal or budget,
right. to my pocketbook,
then you've got something that is motivating people to understand dollar for dollar, penny for penny, what all that pork barrel, or as you call them, outliers, mean to the legislation.
I agree. One frustration is that once we focus people on the tax implications, then they focus on the money it's going to cost them versus the benefits that are maybe not financial, but having a new road or having the bridge to nowhere in Alaska may have been important to the people there, but when you frame it only in terms of dollars, it's complex. So, yeah.
Just spinning off that briefly, maybe a structured framework of some of the key points of the relevance that could be categorized and generalized.
Yeah.
This is great work you're doing, and I'm glad you're doing it. You mentioned in your introduction and showed as one of your examples the fact that legislation is hard to read because it'll say change the third word from and to or and put a plus where there used to be a semicolon or whatever. Is there anything in many bills or anything coming that will be able to take that language and then show you the before and after?
Irene Ross, no, it's not coming. Irene Ross looked into it and talked to some experts in the top field, and they said it's not computationally possible. It's a human task of knowing how to take.
The way that the U.S. Code actually works is that they merge the bills manually, and they go title by title merging the bills. So at times they're actually about 6 years behind merging the bills into the U.S. Code. And so because it's so human, there's really no way we can take what's there and try to apply it. They might be 5 bills behind where they really should be. There's a really great blog, computational legal studies, that folks that are really trying to play with the U.S. Code, but they're really stuck too. So.
For those watching the video at home, Irene was explaining that it's impossible to do computationally, and that there was a blog called Computational Legal Studies that's studying this, but they would love to do it. It's just not possible.
Hi. Looking at your examples and listening to your lament that many of the sites were not engaging to users, it occurred to me that much of what I've seen display results, if you will, or the distribution of welfare payments across the country. And what people are really interested in, I think, are causal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the distribution of welfare payments, and over the top of that, we're going to overlay the poverty rate.
Right. Actually, we've been talking about that because the FCC just released their bandwidth rates per region across the U.S., and we would love to overlay that across census data to find out if different demographic data correlates with slower or faster bandwidth. So that was just for our own interest that we were really discussing that, but I think that's the same kind of point you're making, that it's the correlation between data.
It is, and you could build a tool that would be, I think, compelling in an interaction sense if you had a batch of government actions, such as tax rates, welfare rolls, whatever, and a batch of outcome variables, poverty rates, the age at death, whatever, and you let people pick, and you always displayed the action in shades of red and the consequence in shades of green, so that where they're correlated, you get yellows, and where they're not correlated, you get reds versus greens, so that you could easily see causal relationships and also hot spots where everything's yellow, but over here it's green.
Right.
And I think that might be much more compelling for a broader range of citizens than just displaying, distributions of outcomes.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Pork Kellen from the IXDA, the sister organization. So earlier on this year, I have a two-part story from the trenches, and then I have a question for you. Earlier on this year, the IXDA started a project to mine this government data. But to answer kind of your question, what we did was we applied user-centered design to try and first understand what people wanted to see and then build an application. And I think that's one of the things missing. I've seen it in sites like Unfluence and others. They just let you mine the data, but you can't really see the big picture. So what we did was we paired up developers.
What was the data?
We're pulling it from transparency data and VoteSmart. And follow the money. Everyone has a different kind of take on this data, and we're pulling in from those APIs into our own application, which will allow you to select a representative, select an issue, which is a grouping of bills, and then select a contributor, and then show you
somebody who's donating
not
money,
an individual.
or
Transparency data group contributors into kind of fields of contribution, industries, and so forth. So then you can see who has contributed to a politician, and then if they change their vote on any particular issue. But I think the underlying point that I want to make is that to design for the layman, you have to understand what the layman wants to see. And I think the apps today are really developers just poking and peeking at the data.
Right.
And so that leads into the question that I have for you is the Sunlight Foundation is kind of getting there, but how do we build for these larger workflows? People aren't interested in particular instances of data. They hear something on the news, or they read something on Fox, or see something Jon Stewart said, and they want to dig into that story, or like do a little bit of investigation themselves, which would cross many different websites and many different applications.
It also has the timeliness factor. I mean, you want the data set to be out there today. When you see the news story, you want to be able to go to the website and start noodling around right then. So.
Yeah, one of the things that came out of our initial research was that people aren't really interested in government data. They don't really care. They're interested in issues. They're interested in a news article. Is the person that's telling them this information telling the truth, or do they have a bias? What's behind the story?
Oh, yeah, I guess that, like the death panels comment about the healthcare bill, then people are interested in legislation because they want to confirm or deny that.
Yeah.
So you interviewed users and...
So as part of the IXDA, we actually set up events. So we had a research event where people interviewed, we had someone come down from MadPow, an agency up in New Hampshire, to teach us how to interview users. And so then we all interviewed each other because we're all users of this application, fortunately.
Okay.
Then the second event was a storyboarding and a sketching event, and then we critiqued. So we're kind of tying in events like this to generate information for our application. So we're leveraging both.
Yeah, I think that sounds like the right approach.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is John Robbins, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'm curious about the 2% of these sort of power users that you have, and I would think some of them being reporters or news media types, and whether you've had any conversations with them about how they've used it, and also how can you more easily export fragments or bits of the data to implement or to embed in other applications?
So technically, right now, what you can do to embed is when you're browsing, when you're looking at a bill or you're looking at a collection of bills, there's a share link, and that either generates a URL to that page, or it generates a bit of JavaScript that you can embed into your blog or your article that you're writing that will have a static image of the collection of bills, and that's a link over to many bills. Yeah, we've talked to a few users, not as many as we'd like. I'd say there are official summaries. So a lot of people who need to read legislation already are reading summaries in the news media and all the things that we probably, when you read about legislation today, you generally approach the news media level. And I think professionals do that to some extent. When they do need to read a bill, they were saying many bills is a great way of helping them figure out where to read. not a professional, but our favorite user, who's this enthusiastic citizen, he said he wanted his group to read an energy bill that they were very concerned about or interested in. And so they were going to parcel out, okay, everybody read 10 sections. And they're each going to read the sections. And then we told him about many bills while he was still trying to convince his group that they all needed to read this bill, and because he was having trouble convincing them. When he went and looked at many bills, he said, oh, I don't even need to get them to read it. I can do it all myself because I can see the colors and I can go into exactly the sections. So a task that he thought would require a team, he was able to then do himself.
So then are these kind of findings or outcomes or repackagings shown on your site, or links to here's how so-and-so is?
No, not yet, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hi, Harrison Roberts from EMC. Thank you for the talk. It's really great in terms of empowering citizenry. One of the questions I had was in terms of the key user requirements, because you had 2% of the power users. Have you found that some of the key requirements was less the drill down onto bills and kind of leveraging the machine learning? And is one of the requirements more automation or getting automatic alerts around areas that interest you, or looking for, you mentioned like anomalies that come into bills because they've tagged something along. So if you're a journalist and you're looking for bad behavior by politicians, you can maybe cross-reference with lobbying activity or cross-reference with things that are askew to the main purpose of the bill.
So when I showed you the outliers, it was just based on this surface level topic detection. We had a summer intern work on a different technique for figuring out topical outliers within the bill, not necessarily, like if the bill is labeled credit card and half of it is about finance and half of it is about national parks, then it will be very hard to figure out where the gun part is, because the gun is related to national parks. So what she was working on is basically a better algorithm for outliers, and what we're going to, future features is we're going to allow users to give us feedback on whether or not those outliers match their definition of an outlier and whether or not our classifier was doing a good job or not. The reason we're going that direction is because we think, first, we would love to get user feedback on our automated analysis of the bills, and we also think that task, the user task of finding sections that don't match other sections, we think is the most intriguing one, or the ones that users have talked the most about.
So it'd be a question of not just empowering citizenry, but also helping as a tool to journalists and bloggers to give them kind of more ammunition or alerts, kind of automation.
Yeah, and actually we hadn't thought about sending off alerts, but that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sandra Spector, and it was a wonderful way of wrangling confusion, so I really appreciate what you've done. I love color, and I love using color to explain data. I was concerned about the number of colorblind, and you're having the monitor, that was fabulous, the monitor that didn't show it.
Right.
What's your approach to dealing with that? Because color is like absolutely key in order to anyone to read or use the application.
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't dealt with color, sort of usability issues related to color or sight impaired. We do have a short badge next to the sections when it's in the middle zoomed in mode that will relate to the section. So it's a double coding of color and the badge. But we haven't adequately addressed that issue.
Well, when you actually, a portion of it you sort of did when you had the legislators and show the cross-hatching for those that passed.
Right.
And that didn't need to be color-coded, so it's a possibility. Using colors plus
some other patterns. Yeah. I agree.
Just a quick question on the outliers. You give indication of which legislators have sponsored particular bills, but can you drill down to the level of saying which legislator put in an outlier?
We don't have that. I think that happens behind closed doors. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've learned is the process is much more complicated than it officially is. You know, it's more complicated than it is stated to be. So we actually showed Nikki Tsongas, who's a Massachusetts congresswoman, was visiting the IBM Littleton office, and we showed her page. And I mean, I think if somebody showed you your profile page that you'd never seen before, showing you data about what you did, her reaction was normal. She was not thrilled to see her page. And she immediately started explaining to us how certain bills that looked like no progress had been made on, she had actually slipped in sections of those into bills that had been passed. So she was explaining that we weren't capturing the process. It wasn't accurately reflecting sort of her legislative record. So it was interesting to see a politician be defensive. It was also interesting. It was legitimate feedback that we aren't capturing the very human side of the process.
Bill Barnard again. Just what you were just talking about, when you were showing the slides of the different representatives, I was thinking that something missing from that page was not what bills they've sponsored and how they've, you know, whether they passed or not, but how they voted. And I didn't bring it up because that's kind of outside the idea of many bills.
Right.
But you sort of brought it up again. You know, if you're going to have a legislative page for a representative and showing what they're doing relative to legislation,
the vote is
then
important.
some way of how they voted. Again, they're going to complain that, well, I voted against what looks like an ecology bill because it also included, you know, I don't know, poisoning kittens or something. But I think that when I think about who do I want to re-elect, it has a lot more to do with how have they voted.
Right, yeah, and voting is important. OpenCongress.org is a good site. They have great Congress people pages. So we were inspired by that. We also didn't want to replicate a lot of what they have. But so anyway, I recommend looking at Open Congress's Congress people pages. And I agree with voting is important to add into it, yeah.
Michelle McDevitt, Kronos. I'm wondering, when Tsongas came into your office, did you have you come away with that with any causal relations that you can now do with the data by enhanced algorithms?
So, well, we've thought of it. We haven't done any of it yet, but so she said that parts of the bills she had proposed that looked like they didn't go anywhere got moved into bills that did get passed. So yeah, with text comparison, now it's not going to be exact text, but we were thinking that we could probably do some text matching to figure out the trace of the text from one bill to another.
Because I think that would be very interesting to see how things get tracked, almost sort of like the software release path.
And I mean, she had proposed a lot of really short bills, and we decided to show her one that was about the oil spill, something that we thought was a nice bill that she'd proposed. And it looked like it hadn't been voted on, but that was specifically the one that she said was worked into another bill. So it seemed like the process is a bunch of Congress people propose a lot of bills on very small things, then they're all aggregated together into other bills. It's sometimes how it works. But
Yeah, showing that relationship is probably very important.
Like a network. Yeah.
Hello. Hi. Great work on everything. I'm Josh Patterson. I do design and technology consulting. And two of my thoughts. One was related to video integration in the website. You know, as far as being compelling to people who are not as, you know, if you're trying to reach a broader audience that's less tech savvy, can maybe just have someone present the website in a very short clip, or explore the website, and kind of maybe you could video produce something that could have someone like introduce the site and say this is what we're about, and then this is how you could use it, and show someone like clicking on a few things. Maybe
give a tutorial.
Exactly. And then the other thing is that I'm really impressed by all the community suggestions here, and that, you know, I'm curious about how you could have this type of process really, you know, really harvesting value from the community, and have an efficient pipeline of
Like how BostonCHI can.
well, this and your user community. So, but really just how, maybe it's a blog for like related to development or ideation for the general software, but it seems like there's a lot of excellent ideas here, and possibly some people that would like to contribute from a development perspective.
Right.
And so it's kind of that open source model of how do you really develop this system in the most efficient way, capitalizing on all the value of the community.
I mean, and one of the exciting things about the Gov2.0 space is that there are a lot of highly engaged people around that want to do something. Like we get our data from govtrack.us, and that is an individual that gathers government data, like congressional data from different sources, and puts it out with a nice clean API. So we're actually gathering our data from another, from an actual, just an individual, not an organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that spirit is definitely in this space.
Okay, and then just another thought was I was really impressed by Hans Rosling's presentations at the TED conference. You're probably familiar. Okay, so this just really reminded me of that, and maybe there's some opportunities for some other kind of media venues for promoting this type of cool government accountability and transparency systems. Thank you.
Yeah, is that all? Yeah, thanks. Thank you.